people who equate not respecting neopronouns to being a transphobe, I think that's a bit cringe. However, anybody who's acting like people using neopronouns or xenogenders is some kind of like grievous harm to the world, like you're destroying the movement, like you're going to unwrite reality. Like, some of you sound like Jordan Peterson, I swear, you know? Alright, so I'm only really talking about this right now in the way that I am, because I don't know if there's been like a cohesive video that I've made on it, even though I've released my opinions kind of piecemeal without some huge video to coalesce them around. And I know that there are plenty of people in my community who have... I've seen a ton of discourse in my community, you know, after the recent drama. I've seen people arguing about neopronouns, dear gender, it's xenogenders, this, that, or the other. And there's a lot of really fierce disagreement, which I think I can attribute to two competing facts. On one hand, my community is left-leaning, obviously. On the other hand, I'm known for being a relatively uncucked lefty. Like, I'm not one of the people who will sit here and, like, make big, you know, teary eyes at you and go, like, if it's valid, it's valid. You know, like, I'm not, you know what I mean? And I'm proud of that, because I don't want to. I do try to justify the things I believe in. I like, you know, the pragmatism. And I'm not an especially sensitive person, I think, by default. So I usually need a little bit more of a grounding, or like a, you know, a push to believe in some things that don't make sense intuitively to me. And I want to make you all understand, okay? Intuitively, none of this makes sense to me. I just want to be clear, okay? I'm cis. I've never really thought that much about my gender, seriously. It's a remarkable luxury to just sort of passively, by default, be happy with how you're doing in general. I think a lot of people are like that, but increasingly few people are, or I guess fewer people with time, because I think more and more people are getting red-pilled on how limiting gender expectations can be. So I think with time, it's not that more people are going to be like, you know, transitioning or whatever. More like there's going to be a sort of a broad rejection of hegemonic gender roles, which we've already seen happen for a while, you know? Even if you look outside, like, the woke lefty college communities or whatever, right now, it's not that unusual to see men with long hair or piercings, but 60 or 70 years ago, that would have been, like, very not acceptable socially, you know? Likewise with the way we dress, there are just huge changes, which I think is really nice. Obviously, the more freedom we have, as long as we're not hurting people, that's better. But we're not really talking about behavior here. We're talking about ideology. Of course, the two inform each other. But yeah, all right, let's not beat around the bush. Neopronouns, xenogenders, okay. So I've talked about this a bit before, and there's something I want to point out before we jump into it, and it's that I think it's important to understand these issues with a proportional sense of how relevant they are and how meaningful they are in the context of modern discourse, okay? So I've said before that I don't like it when people who have xenogenders, let's say dream gender, let's just go with that, okay? Whatever that means to you, whatever. I have gotten frustrated when people will equivocate not believing in xenogenders to transphobia. That there's like an equivalence between not saying, oh, you're, you know, you're a dream gender, so on, and that's like ideologically the same as saying that a trans woman is a man, you know. I disagree with that. It strikes to me a little bit of when furries say that they're being discriminated against the way gay people are. I don't like it. Not necessarily because it's wrong for them to be what they are, you know? It's more about whenever you're talking about social issues, you know, we have a limited range for advocacy and defense. And in order to understand how we should prioritize our time and our considerations, we need to proportion the relative problems in ways that make sense. Or I guess to put it more flatly, the problems that people face from transphobia are simply incomparable to the problems people face due to a lack of recognition for Xenogenders. I think these things are just wildly different in terms of their scale, their scope, their nature, their systemic pervasiveness, the effort and energy that antagonists will use to attack them. So I think they should be treated differently. I do believe that. Though that could change with time, at least for now. With regards to let's start with neopronouns. Okay. I've said before that I don't really like neopronouns that much because I feel like, in terms of utility, they semantically serve the same role as nicknames. And I still think that's true. I think that, like, neopronouns are just not a good social road to go down. I don't think they're a functional, useful. I don't think they add utility to our understanding of ourselves. I think they're functionally nicknames, you know. Now, what's important to understand here is that we still respect nicknames, as do we respect self-ascribed names or other identities that we don't consider to hold a lot of social utility. Like, to put it another way, I don't like religion, you know, I'm pretty anti-theist, but I'll still respect a person's religion. And in fact, I generally think that when you're talking to a religious person, unless they're using their religion as like a legitimizing mechanism for bigotry, you know, they're using it to hurt people, you should be respectful. I mean, it clearly means a lot to them, right? Now, I don't give a fuck about religion on its own, but it clearly means a lot to a lot of people. And I think that just as a basic measure of respect, you should be respectful of those beliefs. And in fact, I would go so far as to say that it is bigoted to be discriminatory against a person for their religion, even if I think religion is bad. I mean, we all agree with that, right? Like, if you're targeting, like, Muslim people, and you can deracialize it if you want, you know, let's just say targeting Muslim people, even if I don't like or care about Islam, even if I don't like religion as a concept, I can still morally condemn people for being prejudiced against Muslim people. So to my mind, you know, semantically, do neopronouns, like, is there much utility to them? I don't really think so, especially when you get into, like, people making them for themselves, and I still think you should respect them. I just, there's a huge difference between I disagree with this thing, therefore I will oppose it, and I disagree with this thing because it doesn't seem like the right road to go down, but as long as we're here anyway, I'll respect it. To me, I think those are very different things. The critical difference between the two examples I just used is that religion has done immeasurable harm, at least in some respects, to the world, and neopronouns have done exactly zero harm, you know? I opened this by saying, you know, I don't think that this discourse around xenogender, neopronoun stuff is, like, that impactful, but that goes two ways, okay? People who equate not respecting neopronouns to being a transphobe, I think that's a bit cringe. However, anybody who's acting like people using neopronouns or xenogenders is some kind of, like, grievous harm to the world, like you're destroying the movement, like you're going to unwrite reality. Like, some of you sound like Jordan Peterson, I swear, you know? Or like the bravest individuals there are, you know, like, I refuse to use this. It's not logical. Like, you're doing the same thing from the opposite side, you know. You're taking it too seriously from the other direction. This isn't any better. I think it's worse, actually. Better to err on the side of caution when it comes to stuff like this. The problem is a lot of people not using neopronouns will use it as a proxy to be transphobic. While that's true, Danny Fallen, keep in mind there's also probably a heavy correlation between being homophobic and thinking furries are degenerate, right? And those two things often overlap too, because a ton of furries are LGBT. While there are overlaps and correlations and meaningful relationships between these ideas, I still think it's important to distinguish between them in terms of their relative social scope. Now, I'll talk about xenogenders. I've said this again before, and this goes the same as with neopronouns. I don't think there's much utility to the use of gender to describe what is essentially just an identity. Gender, as I understand it, in the way that it makes most sense to me, is a set of social roles, expectations, and identity associated with sex. So you have, you know, man and woman, You know, you have non-binary, you have cultures with third genders or you know, similar comparable ideas, and usually there's a relationship there too between one's gender and sex expectations. That doesn't mean that you have to be that, only that that's kind of how these terms and concepts arose. Does that make sense? Now, if you go ahead and say that gender can mean any kind of identity, like I've used this example before, but as silly as it sounds, I don't think it's inaccurate to use this. Gamer gender. There are plenty of people out there who care more about being a gamer than there are, you know, than some cis people do about caring about the gender that they are. You know what I mean? It is very much the case that there are people who, if that xenogender stuff was really normalized, might call themselves gamer gender. The issue that I have with this is that at this point, the term gender is just kind of supplanting the term identity in a really weird way, which I don't like. First of all, it seems to kind of erase the utility to distinguishing gender as a concept that we fight against, because then gender is just anything, and then you have the elements of gender that I would consider are kind of bad, you know, like everything pertaining to their roles and expectations associated with sex, and then we're just mixing that in with identities in general, but I don't have an issue with identities, not even expectations associated with identities. It's kind of confusing, not in the sense that I don't understand it, but more in the sense that I feel like it's not very worked out as a concept. I've said this before, but you could conceivably have like Nazi genders, you know? Isn't people widely thinking gender is meaningless a good thing? No, see, that's the problem. In my opinion, people who believe in xenogenders are the opposite of people who think gender is meaningless. They actually think it's quite meaningful, because they talk about it and think about it constantly. They invent new terms to describe and expand its reach into all elements of identity. I think it's the difference, you know. A world which is gender abolished is very, very different to a world in which gender is ubiquitous and all-consuming. I think those are two really different things. So if with regards to like utility and distinction, I think it's acceptable. Chat, I'm not reading your paragraphs and I don't care. Um, the the critical distinction there is that when you are building out gender into some kind of replacement for identity, I think you are unnecessarily imposing a lot of social norms we associate with gender onto every identity a person could be. Or let me put this another way, okay? Do you guys think it would be appropriate in such a world to accuse a person of transphobia because they don't think you're a real gamer when you identify as gamer gender? Or to put it another way, is that a world you want to live in? Because this is not a world I want to live in, okay? I absolutely do not want to live in that world. I do not want discourse for transphobia and gender to expand outwards and to consume every single kind of identity-based argument, you know? If a person accuses you of not being a real gamer, you should respond by 1v1ing in Call of Duty, okay? Not with accusations of systemic bigotry. I do not think the xenogender stuff is like a good road to go down. But as is the case with neopronouns, just because I don't think it's a good ideological route to take doesn't mean you should be disrespectful towards people in the meantime. I just don't see any purpose to that, I don't think. Do you understand? Vosh, I think this is a straw man. Most people who use xenogenders also reject the flippant applications of thing like gamer gender. We've talked about this before, and the issue is they do so arbitrarily. What they're really saying is, I think xenogenders should apply to the things that I find valid, but if I think it's too silly, then I won't. That's not a real argument. Somebody could make the exact same argument from the other side, you know? A gamer gender identifying person could say, well, why the fuck do you think that you get to draw the line arbitrarily? If you believe that gender means any kind of identity, there's no limit to that. There's really no logical distinction. And you could start constructing gender-based identities around a lot of bad things too, you know? Super straight was one of the things here. People could, we've already, I think, sampled a little bit of the bad faith invocation of progressive terminology um, in order to own the libs. But there are plenty of people who identify with, very reactionary or very conservative ideas. And since the ideas that you believe can in part be a component of your identity, that could then be a gender identity, and just no. Now, I do have something like a bit of an addendum to add right here, and it's that everyone in chat who's mad is wrong. I've had this argument with chat half a dozen times, and I win it every time. It's just not changing, okay? Complain all you like, but there is no consistent ideological, non-arbitrary line you could draw that prevents the invocation of xenogenders from being some kind of utterly meaningless, ubiquitized replacement for identity, except with all the baggage and terminology associated with gender. Honest to God, I think it's a little bit, how would you put it? It's a little bit, I guess short-sighted would be the term that I would use. Would you treat every identity with the severity of a gender identity, or would you treat gender identities with the severity of an identity? You have to have one or the other, right? I mean, either gamers are filing transphobia lawsuits, or transgender women are having their identities laughed off the same way you would laugh off like a Lakers fan. Unfortunately, without a strong distinction, it seems like either could happen. I don't think either is acceptable. Again, whatever makes you happy in the meantime. Those are just the feelings that I have on it. Hold on, I can respond to a couple of these. You're grouping people who identify completely harmless to others with fucking Nazis. Once again, Elegant Prince, like everyone who disagrees with me, you're just going to have to chill out for a second and actually listen instead of just getting sort of reflectively mad. It's not about whether or not I'm grouping in people who believe in xenogenders with Nazis. It's about the limits of their ideology and the logical conclusion of their beliefs. What you're doing right now is, well, I guess you would call it low IQ gender. You're, rather than listening to the argument that I'm making about the logical conclusions of the things that you believe, you're just mad that I'm invoking these terms in parallel. But you can go back and listen if you want. I've done this a few times before. I've had arguments with it publicly and in private, and as far as I can tell, these are bulletproof criticisms. I don't think it serves a gender abolitionist goal. I think that it's destructive towards trans people broadly, and I think it cheapens and invalidates the validity of a lot of sort of social arguments we've made. But that is a broad sort of centuries over argument. That's an argument against long-term social movements, social paradigm shifts. That's not an argument against the validity of people who identify by those genders right now. Do you understand? You understand this critical distinction, correct? Once again, I don't like religion as a concept, but if a person is Christian, Muslim, Jewish, whatever, I think you morally should be expected to be respectful to those people. So oftentimes people will hear this and they'll think I'm sort of, enabling harassment or bad treatment. But I think to interpret me in that way is as incorrect as to reject everything that I'm saying altogether. These things have to be held in tandem. They can't be ignored. There's a standard that I like to invoke, I think, or that I've thought of invoking when it comes to, hold on. How would you specifically delineate between gender identity and explicit identity? A set of roles and expectations associated with sex. That's the distinction that I make. And I think that's both historically, contemporarily valid. I think there's a lot of utility to that distinction because discrimination along identities associated with sex is categorically different to discrimination associated with identities that are not aligned along sex. So I think there's validity there. There's a way of thinking about this that I think is reasonable and helpful, In this world, the world we live in right now, we have a number of I'm not reading these paragraphs. We have a number of fairly arbitrary social standards that we adhere to and give great respect anyway. So we have gender. We have gendered honorifics and gendered pronouns. We have horoscopes. We have, various kinds of religious identity. Now, there's nothing objectively meaningful or valuable about these things. They're valuable because they hold value to us. We constructed a world where these things meant something to us, and we're trying to acclimate people's need to have those identities validated. Right? That makes sense, right? But you could easily imagine a different world, can't you? One where instead of two genders being the expected norm, you have maybe four, two associated to each, hegemonic sex. Or you don't have horoscopes, but instead Christ, we have differences between cultures here, don't we? India has their third gender. China has a different calendar. They give great value to the, which year you're born in, year of the horse, year of the chicken. The Japanese believe that your blood type corresponds to your personality to an extent, which, if you've ever watched the noted terrible anime My Hero Academia, is the reason why the blood type of the heroes is listed alongside some other characteristics they have. Now, that's pseudoscientific, though? Yeah, that's my point. That's the point, yes. The point is that these are all arbitrary social standards. Please. There are hundreds of these standards all around the world, but you could easily imagine a world in which things are a little bit different, right? I don't think that would be particularly difficult. In fact, I think any imaginative fantasy or sci-fi author if you've probably read any of those genres, you've probably seen worlds with very different and meaningful, arbitrary social standards. Now, the thing that's essential to understand is that the only reason we consider some issues more valid than other issues is because we chanced into a world in which these were meaningful. I'll take one which is not considered meaningful in this world, at least not in the West. Otherkin, okay? We don't really take Otherkin seriously. Broader society certainly doesn't, and even in progressive movements, they're usually just sort of treated with a passive acceptance. I think that's the most they tend to get. But you could imagine a world in which the concept of otherkin is actually really quite important to people, and maybe gender is significantly less so. Right? You can, chat, I need you to follow through with me here. You can understand that, correct? That there might be another world where some equally arbitrary but otherwise, undifferentiated set of social standards may have arisen. If you can imagine that, then understand this, okay? Everything that I've said right now, and everything that I'm ever going to say on any of these subjects, is done from a position of arbitrarity which is as baseless as any other potential world with these arbitrary systems that you could imagine. The only reason we take seriously some issues, like transgender rights, but not other issues, like otherkin rights, is through a completely arbitrary, a choice of worlds. And it's important to keep that in mind, because oftentimes the logic warriors, the reason paladins, both in my community and many outside of it, will attack things outside of our collective sphere of understanding and caring, as though there's something objectively wrong with it. Do you have any idea how many times I've seen in this community, like the otherkin, like, well, you're not literally a wolf? Pardon me if I'm wrong, but I think logically this is about the same as speaking to a trans woman and saying, well, you didn't literally just grow a vagina. Right? For some reason, somehow, it seems like the ability to logically process what others believe, or what others have said, it just sort of falls to the wayside. Well, you not grow necessarily. You can, you can do bottom surgery or whatever. I guess the issue that I have is that there are some people who are essentializing the systems that we have to an unnecessary or unjustifiable degree. Can you agree with me on that? Well, they're busy wooing, so, And essentialization is, as always the case, the enemy of any kind of meaningful sociological analysis. So just proceed with that in mind. Now, again, I don't think these are really that serious of issues. I don't think it's that serious to say, whatever, okay, it's some side thing. I don't know if that's the road I want to go down, but in the meantime, I'll respect people's identities. I think that's a perfectly acceptable position to take. Some people are concerned optically about how it looks to not excise these ideas from the movement. Like, what if Ben Shapiro shows up on my college campus and asks me how I feel about xenogender people or whatever? And the answer to that, this is critical, by the way, put the burden of proof on them. You look them dead in the eye and you say, what harm are they doing? Who? What? How many people is this? What harm are they doing? Why should I care? I don't know. They're living their life. What? Put the burden of proof on them, and then they, of course, then they have to explain that the ideas of gender are being destroyed. Who cares? What do you saw like a person on Twitter and your gender is dead? What are you talking about? Why are you wasting my time? You're thinking about this more than they do, probably. You put the burden of proof back on them. The substance of these issues is wildly outpaced by the degree to which people care about them when they attack them. All right, I'll now open this up to a brief Q&A. How are we doing? Did you watch Hunter's video? No. You can't literally grow a vagina, but you can literally be a woman. You can't be a wolf unless we change some definitions. No, you can't literally be a wolf if you're talking exclusively in the biological sense. But as I've talked before, the use of animal terms has been allegorically related to people's character in the past, with people all the way back to Yi tribal shaman days, to generals, kings, and emperors in the modern-ish world, being referred to in, have you not heard of people being referred to as, a dragon, a leviathan, a lion, a wolf? Wolf of Wall Street. We do this all the time, really. But it's usually sort of a poetic flair. It's purple prose. Now, you can't be a wolf biologically, like, growing the teeth and stuff, at least not yet. Allegorically, can you be a wolf? Absolutely you can. In fact, I would say that believing a person cannot allegorically be a wolf would almost be an insult to both the concepts of the English language and imagination. To me, I think that's almost a repugnant rejection of literary beauty. The idea that you can't be a wolf in concept. Yes, but that's not gender anymore. No, it's not. But I wasn't talking about gender. Oh, that's right. There are far too many questions here. Sorry to say this, but NFT apes are a male gender. Oof. Probably. Let's see. Would you say the ideal world would be one where gender is so arbitrary there's no need for legislation based on it? Yeah, of course. I mean, ideally it wouldn't exist at all, right? I don't think Ben Shapiro would start to argue about the harm they do, etc. He would just laugh at you using pronouns different than he, she, they. I think that would be an optics hit. I don't think so. First of all, that's not really Ben Shapiro's rhetorical style. He usually says something. He doesn't just laugh it off. Also, if somebody just laughs at you, just ask them, like, are they confused? Like, there's really, as long as you're sufficiently calm, there's not really much to worry about here. Most of the optical hits that the left takes for being associated with more outlandish identity-based ideas comes from people being overly earnest and incompetent at defending them. You don't have to invoke hardcore gender theory to defend them. Just take it calm. The burden of proof should be on other people to explain why the things you care about are harmful. Not the other way around. If a person asks you to justify this, that, or the other, why? You have no obligation to. They have to justify it. We live in a free society. People should be able to do what they want as long as they're not hurting people. People, they get all wound up and angry, and that's, I think, ultimately what can make us look bad, I think you can be vibe-wise a wolf or whatever without it being expressed through pronouns, and there are. As I understand it, most otherkin people don't go by neopronouns. What about otherkin that think they are spiritually/mentally an animal, and is it convenient that otherkin are usually the cool and stylish animals and not insects or parasites? What do you mean convenient? Are you suggesting that people might choose to identify with concepts they find cool and not concepts they find uncool? Do you find that surprising? Why do you think like the Chinese, you know, New Year every year is like they don't have any like really dumb animals up there? You know, you've got the year of the dragon and the year of the wolf, and oh, we don't have the year of the dung beetle or the year of the intestinal parasite. you know, yeah, of course, obviously. Year of the rat. I think that there's meaningful symbolism associated with rats, but no, yeah, we're not going to have it like the tapeworm year or whatever. Um, I'm saying Otherkin say it's a circumstance and not their choice. They're spiritually an animal, and I don't believe in spiritually anything. I'm not validating the idea that a human can be spiritually anything. Why would I care by what systems they arrive at? What like yeah, of course. Human cultures have believed in some sort of transcendent relationship between humans and animals for a long time, but I'm pretty sure they're not usually going out to look for like, dung beetles and such. Probably not. We are what we are. We build these systems because they serve a purpose for us. And for some people, I think, the purpose of these ascribed identities is all about, sort of characterizing positive elements of your personality, which I think is, by the way, completely reasonable. Okay, and I want to say, I think a world in which it's more normalized for people to allegorically relate themselves to animals would be kind of cool, at least in my opinion. Just sort of a like purple prose, a symbolic way of characterizing people based on their personality, this, that, or the other. I think it'd be kind of nice. We already do it. We do to an extent, yeah. I mean, we have the Wolf of Wall Street or whatever, but it's not really about the animal itself. More as the what do you call it? The spirit, the concept. Oh, Hunter, did you want to hop on for a second?
How you doing? Thanks so much for having me on in such short notice.
Of course. Yeah, hit me up. What contentions do you have?
Well, I'm not live right now. I'm going live later, but I'm still going to record this on my end. I had a conversation with Xander Hall yesterday too. And I'm kind of in the process now of just trying to understand more about the neopronoun thing. The thing is, what it sounds like you're saying to me is that it's good to normalize this idea that like you can sort of identify with this like animal aesthetic almost, more or less. Is that?
Oh, I don't know if it'd be good. I mean, I think it could be sort of narratively entertaining. I don't know if it's something that I'd like push for prescriptively. It's just it's another arbitrary social standard that we could have as opposed to any number of the ones we do have.
Right. I guess is there a difference between identifying with something and like identifying as something? Because trans women are women, but if someone told me they identified as a deer, my understanding is there is no like socially constructed form of identification like associated with deer. Deer are biologically driven. There's no gender there.
Well, I think
maybe I'm totally missing the point.
No, not at all. I mean, I think we agree that gender is an identity that one can sort of self-ascribe, and that's enough. When it comes to like an animal, it wouldn't be, one could literally be it, I don't think. More that you could identify with it in some meaningful sense. I mean, like when we're talking about trans women, right? It's sort of the conservative stereotype that a trans person believes that by transitioning their body instantly, like all the XY chromosomes become XX, and right. Of course, that's not it. We separate into two categories: the gender and sex. And if you want, you could imagine, I guess, the animal as you have the sex and the gender of the animal, right? Not literally. We're not talking about gender. We're just talking about sort of an allegory here, where in identifying with, you could imagine one sort of adopting the gender identity, but the sex of the animal, the literal physical.
Well, right. I mean, of course,
well, obviously, we
obviously, yeah. And I know that people are like, and I also know that like Doe doesn't actually claim to be a deer. So I also know that there's like a difference there. Also, I guess it's just, I mean, I posted my video. I only had it up for a short time, and then I decided to take it down because after I talked to Xander Hall, I realized I wasn't as confident in my position, and I also was already really open to changing my mind. But I guess it just kind of stems a lot from, I guess, maybe I misunderstand how gender is formed, but it's my understanding that gender is created through the socialization of human to human contact, right? Like interaction. So I guess you could hypothetically add a gender someday that was like aesthetically associated with like animal traits. But I guess what would be I guess what would that look like now?
Well, I don't know if it's really a gender thing, right? At least for me, I try to think of gender as a set of roles and expectations associated with sex, that there's some kind of
Same, yeah.
historical or social connotation there. I think the whole identifying as deer, whatever the hell else thing is entirely separate. I've never seen anyone say like my gender is deer or my gender is wolf or whatever. More so because there are otherkin communities, right? And
But
they
doesn't
normally
gender? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
well, from what I've seen at least, they normally go by normative pronouns. And then on top of that, there's the otherkin thing, right? So I think it's two separate categories,
Mhm.
maybe.
Sure, I can see that. Yeah. Um, I'm trying to figure out like the next question to ask, just because. Right. So like, does gender doesn't gender dictate pronouns, more or less? Like, not dictate. Maybe that's a bit of a harsh word there, but rather isn't it basic? Don't you select your pronouns based on your gender identity?
For
Isn't
the
that
most
usually how
part,
that
yeah.
works?
Yeah, I mean, we have gendered pronouns in English, so I think there's like a strong association there. I mean, certainly most people who identify as men would go by he, him, or whatever, but there are
Right.
people
So
who
when
go by
someone's
he,
saying
they, or yeah, yeah.
But when they want it pronouns, that sounds like to me what they're saying is that they are identifying as a deer, right? Because they already said they identify as a deer more or less, or that was my understanding at least. And then they're also being asked to be referred to with it pronouns. So that maybe that's where the confusion came from, that it was like their gender identity and not just like an aesthetic.
I
I'm
think I think it might be I think there might be a kind of deliberate incoherence to all these concepts being evoked simultaneously, which I imagine I imagine it's deliberate at least. I mean, I certainly think Doe is intelligent to know enough to know what it's doing. I think it's not so much about, the pronouns specifically being delineated by gender identity or the Doe thing being deliberated by, gender identity. To me, I guess it would be more about, twisting the existing paradigms and boundaries that we have concerning these ideas to a
Mhm.
point where whatever ascribed social meaning we hold in relation to those terms or associations would best align with its self-perception. I guess, I mean,
Right.
again, like to me, this is terribly abstract because I've never had to think about any of this stuff. But I try to think of it like if you push allegory further down the line, like I'm trying to think
Mhm.
of like, ancient shaman or whatever. And I'm thinking like, well, if I can imagine like, are there people historically who have been referred to primarily as like an animal name, even though they were human and everyone knew them as human? And that is true. That's a thing that's happened, And
Mhm.
are there people who have used honorifics or titles which were constructed specifically for them, or which sort of undermined other elements of their perceived identity? And you can find examples of that too. So I think if you add all that up, there's precedent, and it's just sort of a
And if it's specific to the
defying
person, doesn't that
expectation.
kind of I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you
No, no,
there.
no, no, I was rambling at that point.
No, it's okay. It's just it like I understand what you're saying. I also saw someone said mention how we actually refer to boats as she, her. So like pronouns obviously have some flexibility there, but if it's unique to the individual, then doesn't that kind of defeat the point of it being a pronoun?
Um, well, in terms of like semantic utility, I do believe that
Well, it's because
neopronouns.
right, that was my argument. Yes, that was my argument against its pronouns at first, but being like against it because I usually argue it from a perspective of utility. I've also found that argument to be really effective when arguing with like conservative transphobes or whatever by pointing out how like it actually makes way more efficient. Like it's more efficient to refer to trans people as their preferred pronouns rather than try to like jump through this long tangent about how like they look like a woman but they're biologically blah, blah, like whatever. Like so I usually would make the utility argument as well, but then people are saying, well, you should be respectful, you should be nice. And I agree with that, but yeah, if it's unique to the individual, it just seems like that defeats the purpose of the pronouns. Aren't pronouns supposed to be broad?
Well, I agree that semantically neopronouns serve the same basic purpose as nicknames or
Hmm.
something else like that. I don't if the concern here is like respecting that. I mean, we respect people's nicknames, so I don't see any reason why we wouldn't respect neopronouns. In terms of like arguing in favor of it, I don't know if there are any arguments you could use against a conservative that would legitimize the validity of a neopronoun.
I'm not
Not
even
not
talking conservatives even.
or
I'm
even
trying
yeah,
to understand it myself too.
you
So,
would have to bite the bullet on it, I think. Or to put it another way, I think it's difficult to mount a defense that would be convincing to someone who wasn't already on board with a lot of weird sort of gender stuff. But if you want to go down that road, I mean, you could talk about, and again, I just want to say, semantically, I don't think there's that much utility, but there's not a lot of utility in a lot of semantic stuff we engage in. But if you want to
Mhm.
go down that road, I guess you could talk about, the right to self-expression, and if you understand that pronouns are meaningfully detached from one's sex and gender, as is the case with plenty of people by go he, they, she, they, them, generally, you could meaningfully accept then that this is a linguistic space that's ripe for self-expression, and that while it may generally be confined to this, that, or the other, it needn't be. There's no moral prescription why it shouldn't go further than that. Um,
Right.
right,
So it
and then
doesn't
past that, it would
have
just
to
be
be.
comfort.
So then, yeah, so I would have been wrong then if I said that your gender dictates your pronouns. It would more or less be correlated with your gender often, but it's not necessarily caused by it.
Yeah, I think so. There are plenty of examples outside of us because in English, we have our gendered pronouns, but I'm pretty sure that if you look at other cultures, there are examples of there being much like weirder, I guess by our standards at least,
Mhm.
associations between pronouns used and this, that, or the other. Like honorifics in Japan, right? I mean, they have their san, their kun, so on, which is meant to denote respectfulness and familiarity. Um,
Mm.
and in those cases, and you can see this whenever you're like watching anime and you're more familiar with it. Um, that sometimes the use of those honorifics is deliberately misused, or it's conflated in a way to say something meaningful about one's identity in a disruptive or socially subversive sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my where I'm kind of at now after talking with Zan, talking with you, reading a little bit more up on this, I feel like yeah, it would probably be that neopronouns don't serve much of a utility right now. However, if we're talking about, I guess from you, I mean, I know you're a gender abolitionist. So I guess maybe this is followed by another question, actually, not so much a summary, but if you're a gender abolitionist, I know it sounds kind of bad faith to be like, well, why are you adding more genders, lol? But like, is it about like destroying gender entirely, or is it about just pushing the boundaries of what we consider gender? Because if that's what gender abolition is, then I would understand that, yeah, maybe it doesn't serve a lot of utility now, but hey, we might as well accept it because there will be a time where it might if we want to break down these gender norms.
Oh, for me, it's mostly about the former. I think it's kind of like a concessionary thing, right? I don't like it when people care a ton about gender. Like if there's a cis guy who cares a ton about it, like, oh, this is what men are, this is what men do. I'm not particularly fond of that. But there are also lots of trans people who care tremendously about their gender, and that I'm more sympathetic towards, because it seems in those cases their their deviations from my preference are done in such a way as to achieve a fraction of the goal that I want to reach anyway. Because for me, the goal of gender abolitionism would be to end a bunch of social constraints associated with the boundaries that we've erected around gender and sex. So when a
Sure.
trans person transitions or wants to go by this name or the other, even though that's caring about gender, and they care an awful lot about gender, a lot of trans people, you or to put it another way, I suppose, if you were to deny trans people the social more of caring about their gender in the name of gender abolitionism, you're hurting the people most hurt by gender expectations in the name of abolishing gender expectations. And likewise with its pronouns or whatever, we're talking about deviation from social normality, not necessarily in a direction that I think is like ultra productive, but to deny them that or to be disrespectful towards that would be infinitely worse, you know. It's the
All
utility
right.
of allowing it versus the utility of denying it. And in that case, allowing it is leagues ahead, massively so.
Hmm. You know, that's interesting, actually. I didn't even think about it from that perspective because I was very preoccupied originally with thinking about just the utility of language. And I mean, my original sort of thought and take was more or less like if I hear someone say he, him, she, or even they, I know they're at minimum talking about a human. But when you say it, I mean, you're like that pronoun is almost exclusively for non-human, like inanimate objects or animals or whatever. But again, I guess this would kind of go back to, well, if we are going to push the boundaries of gender, if that's the goal here, then there would be no reason why we shouldn't also accept neopronouns as well.
Yeah,
Is
and
that more or less, I guess?
yeah, it's just, you know, other it's I think that I mean, the alternative again is sort of in the name of keeping people from being hurt by gender expectations, hurting people most hurt by gender expectations, right? I mean, anyone who cares enough about their identity to go about with the neo pronouns or what have, I mean, clearly they care more about it than I do, right? They, you know, they're putting thought into it. I put no thought into anything that I do, especially not this channel. But says self-deprecating.
Obviously,
That's
yeah.
right. Yeah, obviously. Yeah, but you know, they clearly they clearly care quite a lot. So it seems like if ever an instance of caring about this sort of thing or expanding the reach of these concepts were to be made, it would be, you know, in the name of stuff like that. If anything, the its pronouns comes off to me a little bit like people from, say, China who don't adopt Western names. You know how oftentimes they'll come over and they'll be like, oh, my name's Kim or whatever, but sometimes they choose to keep non-Western names, which can
Hmm.
sometimes be like really difficult for us to pronounce easily without, you know, uh, sometimes causing offense. But I think there's meaning in that, right? The idea that they don't think they should have to be anglicized to be taken seriously, that you should move outside your cultural and linguistic norms to accommodate them, and that to me feels at least somewhat comparable.
Yeah, actually,
Yeah.
I think that's a really good comparison because you could argue that, well, by requesting that kind of a name that doesn't serve a lot of utility if no one knows what that means or if that's even referring to a name of a person. I think that that's actually no. I think that that actually could be a really good comparison there for sure because yeah, it's not just about utility there. It would also be about pushing the boundaries, I guess, of yeah, like having a Western name in that case.
Yeah, because I mean, I'll admit when it, and I've said this before, but like whenever I hear it's referring to a person, it there's a lag in my brain because of course the first thing that I think when I hear like, oh, it did this, what I'm thinking is like it a concept, it a place, it a thing, it a
An
person, and then
entity,
like yeah, I
yeah.
have to run through like the but maybe, I mean, honestly, that's probably as much a familiarity thing as anything. There are, after all, languages without gendered pronouns. So to them, the pronouns they use for an object and a person would be the same, at least in some conjugations. And
Hmm.
they clearly are fine with it. So that's probably more of a familiarity thing with it than anything, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Some people in the chat are being funny. They're saying I'm just going to absorb Vosh until I become an entire Vosh light.
No, no,
Yeah, that's the goal right there, guys. I guess I have one more really quick question and then I'll let you go. But do you think that people are I don't want to say naturally because that sounds really cringy, but do you think that like people more or less have a bit of a aversion sometimes to progress, like because it's not familiar? Do you think that there's like a natural reactionary sort of like pushback against change or progress that like is common for people to sort of experience? Not like necessarily like they're intentionally pushing back against progress, but maybe it could just be like the lack of familiarity there.
No, I think that's absolutely the case. I think a lot of people do it out of a kind of reflexive guilt because it's not just what you're socialized into, it's what you're socialized against. When the Overton window changes and you're like 50, 60, 70, whatever, especially as time goes on, things that are now being normalized are things that you spent your life fighting against, which means that you have a pretty strong like moral investment in rejecting them, because the alternative would be acknowledging that you were wrong the entire time. You know, just
Right.
recently, one of the surviving members of the band Queen was saying, you know, woke nonsense has gone too far. They would need to have a trans person in Queen in order to make it today, which is silly for a few reasons. First of all, what major band has a trans person playing in them? It's clearly not the case. But also, they had fucking Freddie Mercury in there. Now, I wasn't around back in the 80s, you know, but I'm pretty sure
Hmm.
Freddie Mercury back in the 80s was as, if not more, socially disruptive than trans people are today. I mean, that was like his thing. He was half musician, half just sort of sex uh wizard, you know. But
Damn.
right, well, right. I mean, but time moves on, so people move past the boundary of what they think it's acceptable to advocate for. I think it'll
Right.
happen eventually to you and I too, I think. Just hopefully it'll happen late in life and on relatively minor things.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing is I think that the more that I continue to like kind of ask questions, Pepe, the more I feel like I'm really interested in I want to have the correct take. I want to be correct on this issue, and it does sound like I think the best argument you made, or one of the best ones you made just now, was definitely that the utility of respecting the pronouns goes a lot further than the maybe like decrease in our utility regarding language or whatever. Like I think that I can get behind that too.
Yeah, it's because you get outbursts like this from time to time with like every couple of years, you know, you have something a little bit like this where there's something that seems a bit off, but it's kind of attached to a broader movement that's worthy of defense. I'm trying to think of like a good sort of comparable. You know how back in 2015, 16, 17, you couldn't go a month without a news article coming out of a trans woman being maybe a bit presumptuous about things, and she's like recorded in doing so. You know, we had like that
Hmm.
GameStop lady, but there have been plenty of
Yeah.
examples. Right. And of course, you know, this happens regardless of your gender, whether you're cis or trans, but this happens every once in a while. And when you look at that, it's like, okay, so this isn't the best behavior, but, you know, and I think the temptation for a lot of people is to drop it like a hot iron, you know, like, okay, well, we're not about that, you know. But I think that's the
Hmm.
same thing that led a lot of binary trans people to drop non binary people about 5 or 6 years ago when NBs became sort of more of a, you know, visible talking point. It's always like, okay, well, that I don't want to touch. But you don't really ever know if what you're distancing yourself from is going to be part of a major civil rights movement, a brief temporary excursion from normalcy, or just some relatively harmless thing that's never really going to harm anyone, so there's no point in attacking it. And I'd err on
Right.
the safe side there.
Yeah, of course. And also I've noticed too, just with the access that we have to the internet, like anytime anybody acts crazy in any circumstance, like the odds are there's going to be a video, it's going to get shared, and then it kind of taints people's perception. I was responding to a video not too long ago, and they were still referencing the "it's ma'am" thing from like 3 years ago. It's like, bruh,
Yeah.
clearly there's not that much bullshit going on if you have to reference the one video from 3 years ago still. Like,
Oh yeah,
yeah.
no,
Well,
absolutely. Like the people using Big Red in their YouTube thumbnails still.
right, yeah, like Ariel Scarcella or whatever. Yeah.
Right.
All
I
right. Well,
I
hey, I
appreciate you coming
appreciate
on,
you
man.
having me on, man.
Yeah, anytime, absolutely. Oh, okay. I'm being told now that the comment from the Queen member was taken out of context. I'll read into that later, but either way, that's good, I guess. The point still
Okay.
stands, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Well, either way, thanks for having me on last minute here. I really appreciate it, and I'm happy that I could start a little bit of discourse today about neopronouns once again.
Yeah, have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you soon. Okay,
Yeah, you too. See you, Vosh.
peace. Ah, yes, the Brian Mayferil is saying here that their words were twisted and stitched apart by a journalist at an ITV event. They say they're very friendly to trans people. My heart is open, as always, to humans of all colors, creeds, sexes, and sexualities. Okay. Journalisting. Okay, gotcha. British media. Okay, gotcha. All right, there we go. Um, okay, it seems like taken out of context, far as I can tell. So that's nice. Now we know. Hold on. Vosh not addressing it's being a slur is super disappointing when it's one of the most discussed topics in his community. All right, get ready for it. Okay? Here's my hot take. I don't care. You're like people who get angry at trans women who call each other like the F slur. Okay? I'm really sorry. Listen, if a person asks you to call them by it's not a slur. Slurs are words specifically constructed to designate malice towards a given group of people. It's is something which is used offensively against trans people, usually trans women, to invalidate their humanity. But that doesn't mean it's is a slur. If it was a slur, it wouldn't have use as the most common pronoun. It's just something that's often invoked in that respect. But if somebody wants you to do it, I just don't think I just don't know how sincere sometimes those concerns are. I'm sure they're sincere in many cases. Just sometimes it feels like, oh, I can't use your appropriate pronouns. That would be disrespectful. It would be disrespectful to gender you properly. Like, I don't know. It just seems sort of a bit odd to me. I'm not really sure where that would come from. You're not hurting anyone. If they ask you, what if a black dude says their pronouns are the N-word and then record them saying that before you use it, okay? Oh yeah, true. Wait, wait, that's completely true. Doe, that's perfectly true, okay? Most often when people want to hurt trans women, they don't say it's, they say he, him. Or is he, him a slur? I don't think so. I mean, I don't think so. So yeah, I don't really think that's the slur. In all seriousness, though, if somebody says my pronouns are N-word with a hard R and soft A, you know, I don't listen. This is just my personal opinion, okay? But I think it's okay to reject somebody's self-ascribed identity if they're fucking about with you, okay? Now, obviously, the line there is going to be subjective, but I think you can distinguish between a good and bad faith, and you know, I think that's. I think you can usually do. Okay, to put this another way, I've been in progressive communities for a long time, and I have literally never seen anybody in bad faith use their gender identity as a way of meme baiting other people. I have never seen that happen ever. I've seen Steven Crowder types and Destiny types who use it in bad faith to meme on other people, but I've never seen, yeah, but I've never seen progressives do it. It's always anti-progressives who are doing this shit. Lauren Southern legally being a trans man. Yeah. Anyway, I just don't think it hurts anyone. Look, you can maintain. There were people in chat criticizing me from both directions. There were people in chat saying that I'm a bigot for not thinking that neopronouns are the best thing ever, and there are people in chat who are upset with me for saying that we should respect them at all. There's of course, you know, going to be a wide range of disagreement here, and I respect shut up, Joe. And I respect that disagreement. However, I do want to make something clear, okay? There's range of acceptable discourse, and then there's the range of unacceptable discourse, okay? And let me say, at least within this community, what is unacceptable discourse, okay? If a person wants to go by it's, they go by it's. There's just no two ways about it. I'm as interested in seeing that issue discussed in this community as I am in whether or not trans women are women, you know. You can talk about ways of arguing the point, or you can talk about strategy or this, but I do not want to open up my subreddit and see threads of people arguing as to whether or not that's really the case. I just I do not want that. Now you can talk about the broader social utility of these ideas if you like, okay? But I can't help but notice, and I've pointed this out before, it really does seem the case that people who are opposed to xenogenders and neopronouns put far more effort into thinking about them than any actual advocates do, you know? Usually it's one person is xenogender or neopronoun, and it erupts thousands of people having discourse and arguing, and people get... And just, again, proportionate response, of course. Proportionate response. That's it. Vosh, I don't pretend to understand the neopronoun stuff, but I won't really use pronouns meant to reference a person as a thing in terms of their pronouns. To me, it's them embracing their own dehumanization. I won't do that. That's my take. I have it alone. You can disagree. Yeah, well, if you're typing it out, you got to type it out, don't you? the I think this a remarkably limited perspective. Do you think every language where there are pronouns that are used for inanimate objects and for people is like a language which dehumanizes people? I mean, you could, yeah, like embracing the dehumanization is part of the point. Why do you think there are, like, why do you think ContraPoints refers to herself? What has she called herself in her videos? A chaser, the F slur? Uh, I imagine she says some wild stuff with other friends. Uh, Bio girl. I mean, she'll jump all around, you know. I think that it's very much the case. There are plenty of people who are socially disadvantaged who will make an effort to disempower the insults people use against them by adopting them. What is it? You know, that which is used as your armor cannot be used as a sword against you, you know? Um, and I will say, by the way, and this is very much the case, groups of gays who will casually refer to themselves and others as the F slur, and I'm only saying F slur because I'm on Twitch, by the way, because I used to say that shit all the time before I got back on Twitch. Those groups are hurt much less by calling the F slur, by being called the F slur from outside, than groups that refuse to say it within their own, you know, circle. In my opinion, that's what I've noticed. You know, you do destigmatize it some wise, which I think can be quite helpful. All right, are we settled? Are we good? Right, a source of power. Exactly. Are we good? Are we good? We were going to play Metro. This is already an hour long. Are we sufficient? We went a little past my expected duration here, but are you advocating for thick skin? I am always advocating for thick skin. It is a wonderful thing to be thick-skinned. That doesn't mean you should shame people for not being thick-skinned, you know, just there's a lot of linguistic fuckery here. You guys have noticed that I sometimes use gay in place of bad. There's a very big difference between like a 4channer who's 17 years old and hates gay people using gay as an insult and me using gay as an insult. And I think that's pretty much, that's almost intuitively recognized. There's a lot of variety there, I think, just in terms of how stuff like this has, you know, an impact and the meanings that we ascribe. Basic context. Anyway, that's enough. I trust you guys. All right.